Impact of Google's antitrust measures on Mozilla's future. The DOJ's proposed crackdown on Google's search engine deals could destabilize Mozilla, whose survival hinges on its long-standing partnership with the tech giant. Banning default search placement deals may weaken Google's grip, but it risks crippling the very alternatives meant to provide choice, said Sanchit Gogia, CEO and Chief Analyst at Greyhound Research. The remedy must distinguish between dominant gatekeepers and dependent participants. If Firefox were shut down, it wouldn't just mark the death of a browser. It would mark the end of one of the last surviving independent rendering engines, Gecko, said Gogia of Greyhound Research. As quoted in computerworld.com, in an article authored by Gyana Swain published on May 5, 2025. Beyond the media quote, our view in full. Before you read on, what follows is anchored by a Greyhound flashpoint, a focused insight drawn from our standpoint, validated through Pulse data from CXO trackers, and enriched by field notes from real-world advisory work. Banning default search deals may hurt the open web more than help it. Greyhound flashpoint. Banning default search placement deals may weaken Google's grip, but it risks crippling the very alternatives meant to provide choice. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 48% of technology executives worry that blunt force antitrust measures risk damaging ecosystem diversity by eliminating crucial revenue streams for independent platforms. At Greyhound Research, we believe the remedy must distinguish between dominant gatekeepers and dependent participants. Greyhound standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, banning default search deals without alternative funding pathways could inadvertently collapse the independent web. Mozilla's reliance on Google, while uncomfortable, reflects a commercial compromise born out of necessity, not collusion. Simply outlawing these deals won't dissolve platform power. It will shrink the number of viable alternatives and concentrate user traffic further. A more strategic remedy would be to mandate fair bidding mechanisms for search defaults and require that funds from such deals be transparently reinvested into open-source development and user privacy innovations. Greyhound Pulse Insight. In Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 67% of CIOs across Europe and North America expressed concern that regulatory blunt instruments, such as blanket bans, often solve for optics, not long-term outcomes. Specifically, 59% stated that platform dependence has outpaced their ability to diversify revenue or reach, mirroring Mozilla's challenge. CIOs across the financial services and public sectors particularly warn against remedy mechanisms that eliminate diversity without building replacements. Greyhound Field Note. Per a recent Greyhound Field Note involving a Nordic telco evaluating browser partnerships for embedded services, executives raised concerns that removing search monetization for smaller players would make it economically unviable to support non-Chromium browsers. Despite an ideological commitment to openness, the board voted to consolidate around Chromium-based offerings, an example of how regulatory remedies, without transition support, often entrench the very incumbents they aim to discipline. A Firefox shutdown would be a strategic blow to browser competition. Greyhound Flashpoint. If Firefox were shut down, it wouldn't just mark the death of a browser. It would mark the end of one of the last surviving independent rendering engines, Gecko. Per Greyhound Developer Pulse 2025, 73% of front-end engineers believe that a Chromium-only future risks monopolized standards, weaker privacy defaults, and slower innovation. At Greyhound Research, we see this not as a product loss, but a protocol-level failure. Greyhound Standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, the potential shutdown of Firefox represents a systemic collapse in browser pluralism. Gecko is not just a competing engine. It is a critical check on Chromium's dominance, ensuring that web standards evolve through competition, not fiat. If Mozilla exits, developers will face an increasingly homogeneous, Google-led web. This isn't just about brand choice. It's about architectural resilience, developer autonomy, and national technology sovereignty. A single rendering engine world is inherently more fragile. Greyhound Pulse Insight. In Greyhound Developer Pulse 2025, 73% of engineers globally and 81% in policy-sensitive sectors, e.g. education, government, said they actively test on Firefox not out of market reach, but to preserve diversity in code behavior and compliance. Nearly half believe that if Gecko disappears, Chromium will set a de facto standard even without formal W3C consensus, compromising the openness of future protocols. Greyhound Field Note. Per a recent Greyhound Field Note from a global edtech firm based in Bangalore, the CTO shared that their student assessment tool had to be re-architected due to inconsistent Chromium updates that affected accessibility features. Firefox, though used by less than 10% of their users, remained their benchmark browser for standards compliance. The risk of its shutdown, they noted, would force full dependency on Chromium quirks, eroding their long-held accessibility and privacy-first commitments. Mozilla's crisis may force a rethink of how we fund open web infrastructure. Greyhound Flashpoint. Mozilla's vulnerability is not an outlier, it's a warning. Nonprofit browser organizations, long considered public goods, are caught in a commercial system that rewards monopolies and penalizes independence. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 62% of policy-aligned CIOs believe that core web infrastructure now requires public-private funding models to survive. At Greyhound Research, we believe Mozilla's crisis may catalyze the birth of a new civic tech funding paradigm. Greyhound Standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, the internet economy has outgrown its original assumptions that advertising would fund free tools and that nonprofit entities could compete on utility alone. Mozilla's situation reveals the limits of idealism in a monetized web. As browsers become geopolitical assets, used to control identity, privacy, and even content visibility, governments and large enterprises must treat them as strategic infrastructure, worthy of independent funding streams. Civic tech needs a new balance sheet. Mission-led, but commercially viable. Greyhound Pulse Insight. In Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 62% of CIOs in regulated industries, healthcare, public sector, financial services, said they are open to funding or participating in consortia that support independent digital infrastructure, provided transparency, accountability, and alignment with local regulation are guaranteed. The failure of open-source browser foundations, many noted, would collapse security and privacy baselines now embedded in compliance frameworks. Greyhound Field Note. Per a recent Greyhound Field Note from a Middle Eastern sovereign digital program, officials shared that they are evaluating long-term funding mechanisms for open-source browsers and identity layers as part of their national digital stack. Their concern? A monopolized browser market could lead to external control over critical authentication and content routing. The Mozilla situation has accelerated internal debates on whether web infrastructure should be viewed as a utility, not just a market participant. Analyst in focus. Sanchit Gogia. Sanchit Gogia, or SVG as he is popularly known, is a globally recognized technology analyst, innovation strategist, digital consultant, and board advisor. SVG is the chief analyst, founder and CEO of Greyhound Research, a global, award-winning technology research, advisory, consulting, and education firm. Greyhound Research works closely with global organizations, their CXOs, and the board of directors on technology and digital transformation decisions. SVG is also the founder and CEO of the House of Greyhound, an eclectic venture focusing on interdisciplinary innovation. Copyright policy. All content contained on the Greyhound Research website is protected by copyright law and may not be reproduced, distributed, transmitted, displayed, published, or broadcast without the prior written permission of Greyhound Research or, in the case of third-party materials, the prior written consent of the copyright owner of that content. You may not alter, delete, obscure, or conceal any trademark, copyright, or other notice appearing in any Greyhound Research content. We request our readers not to copy Greyhound Research content and not republish or redistribute them, in whole or partially, via emails or republishing them in any media, including websites, newsletters, or intranets. We understand that you may want to share this content with others, so we've added tools under each content piece that allow you to share the content. If you have any questions, please get in touch with our community relations team at connect@thofker.com.